back to the Worcester Senior Center Stay Connected programming on Channel 192. My name is Suki Lapin and I am the program coordinator at the Worcester Senior Center. Today I am in front of Tuckerman Hall, a concert hall in Worcester, Mass. It was built in 1902 in the neoclassical style and restored in 1999. I chose the Tuckerman Hall location to introduce our September distinguished speaker, Betty Hauck, because Betty played with Yo-Yo Ma of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and Tuckerman Hall is home of the Massachusetts Symphony Orchestra. Please welcome Betty Hauck, violinist and violist, who will present a talking play, A Life in Music Lost and Found, My Journey as a Musician with Hearing Loss. For 50 years, Betty enjoyed a rich and rewarding career as a professional violist until the day she realized that she had to retire because of progressive hearing loss. For 3 years, she completely turned her back on music. In this talk and play presentation, she will tell the story of how various twists and turns led her back into sharing the joy of music while educating and advocating with those with hearing loss. Her talk will be punctuated by short musical selections in both violin and a violinist. Highlights of Betty's career include performing for the Kennedys at the White House, playing in a string quartet with Yo-Yo Ma, and as a founding member of the Apple Hill Chamber Players, touring the Middle East annually, performing and teaching young Palestinian and Jewish music students. Stay safe, stay hydrated, and stay connected by watching the Worcester Senior Center's Stay Connected programming on Channel 192.
Delighted to be talking to you today. My name is Betty Hauck, and I will be presenting my program, which is called A Life in Music Lost and Found, My Journey as a Musician with Hearing Loss. I call it a talk and play because I'll be both talking and playing. And I will be telling my story about being a musician, a professional touring musician, concert musician who lost her hearing, and the twists and turns that brought me back to playing after I stopped playing for 3 years. So I was very fortunate to have a rich and rewarding career in music for 50 years. And some of the highlights of that career were playing at the White House for the Kennedys. I played in a string quartet with Yo-Yo Ma, and I played a solo with the Boston Pops when I was in college, when Arthur Fiedler was the conductor. And for 24 years, I played with a group called the Apple Hill Chamber Players at a beautiful place in Nelson, New Hampshire called Apple Hill. And that's where we're recording this today. I'm in this beautiful setting. It's an old farm that was built in was founded in the 1700s. And this is where I lived for 17 years. And as I said, played for 24 years. We started out as a local group, then became regional, then national, and then international. And we started a program called Playing for Peace. And this program was an opportunity for us to meet with both Palestinian and Jewish Israeli music students and work with them and offer them scholarships to come study at Apple Hill during our summer program. So this program started out in Israel and then expanded to Jordan and Egypt and Syria. We went to Morocco and Poland. It was very exciting being in the Middle East and working with these students, and we had some we had some wonderful experiences, the working with the students, the performing, and we also got to meet King Hussein's wife, Queen Noor. And one of the things that it kind of tickles me to be able to say it is that I coached the viola section of the Royal Jordanian Army Orchestra. And that was a really interesting experience. And another really important part of my musical life was the playing that I did with a wonderful group of musicians that were associated with an Emmanuel church. And the musicians were referred to as Emmanuel Music. And this was begun by a dear friend named Craig Smith, who loved Bach cantatas, and we played for many years, and it's still ongoing. For every Sunday morning during the school year, played a Bach cantata. A Bach cantata is for singers and orchestra. That was a great experience as well. And this playing at Emmanuel is part of my story. So I'd say about 20 years ago, I started to notice that I was having a little trouble hearing conversation. I maybe had to ask people to repeat themselves, and it seemed like people were mumbling more than they used to. And I realized that I was starting to have some hearing loss. It didn't seem to affect my playing or my music, but I did notice it in conversation. But then the day came when I realized I really needed to get my hearing tested, and also consider the possibility of needing to get hearing aids. That was a big hurdle for me as a musician, to consider that I might need hearing aids. So I went to an audiologist and they tested my ears, and sure enough, I had a sensorineural hearing loss, which is the most common form of hearing loss. And my hearing was moderate. My hearing loss was moderate to severe. And I was prescribed hearing aids. Hearing aids are incredibly expensive, and although that's going to be changing very soon, so I had to pay, I forget how much my first pair of hearing aids, it was in the thousands of dollars. And when I first started wearing the hearing aids, I realized that that I didn't need to use them for concerts, because I much preferred the sound of music without them, because the sound quality was better. And the thing about hearing aids is they certainly help a lot, but they're not like glasses. They don't really correct for the problem. They help. Glasses correct your vision. Hearing loss is more complicated, and so, as I said, as it definitely helps, it doesn't correct the whole problem. And everyone's hearing loss is different. So for several years, maybe a couple of years, I started wearing my hearing aids, but I would wear them at rehearsals when I needed to hear what people were saying. So if I was playing for a conductor, I would need to be able to hear him during rehearsal, or if I was playing chamber music, I needed to be able to talk to the other people in the group, but I did not wear them for concerts. But eventually I realized I was having trouble hearing the higher notes while I was playing. And I was having trouble even hearing myself playing higher notes. So at that point, I started wearing hearing aids for performances as well. Now, there's a stigma attached to hearing loss that I think maybe is associated with age, and which is really unfortunate, because I think it's part of our culture to not associate positive qualities to age. And I like to call old age the third age, the age of experience and the age of wisdom. The culture is, I think, probably more youth-oriented, our culture. And so people try to hide their hearing loss or are in denial about it. don't want to accept the idea that they might have hearing loss, and for understandable reasons. Also, I think because it's invisible, it's harder for other people to understand, and people can get irritated, or like if somebody says something and you don't understand what they say and you have to ask them to repeat it a couple of times, they'll get irritated. Or sometimes if a stranger has asked me something and I ask them to repeat it, and they'll shake their heads and walk off in a huff. So one of the things when they're marketing hearing aids, they talk about how invisible they are, so no one knows that you're wearing them, and that to me reflects the stigma. So, and as a musician, I didn't want people to know that I had hearing loss. My best friends knew, but I didn't want it broadcast that I was suffering from hearing loss. And definitely the most famous musician with hearing loss was, as you may have already guessed, was Beethoven. And he had a reputation for being kind of cranky, and he also hid his hearing loss. He didn't want anyone to know about it. So, but he became kind of irritable and had a reputation for that. And I think he felt really badly about that. And I'm going to read something, an excerpt from something that Beethoven wrote called the Heiligenstadt Testament. This is what he wrote to be put with his will, and it was addressed to his two brothers. And it's called the Heiligenstadt Testament because he was in a little town called Heiligenstadt, which is a suburb of Vienna. He had heard that there was a doctor there who might be able to cure his hearing, and he'd gone there to try to get his hearing cured, and it was no go. And I think Beethoven was very frustrated because he kept hearing about doctors who could help him, and he'd go see them and they couldn't help him. And I was really surprised to learn that Beethoven started having serious hearing loss when he was 28. I didn't realize he was that young when he started having appreciable hearing loss. So for the majority of his adult life, he suffered from hearing loss. So this is what he said. "Oh, you men who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me. You do not know the secret causes of my behavior. From childhood, my heart and mind were always inclined towards the gentle feelings of goodwill. I was eager to accomplish great deeds, but reflect now that for 6 years I have been a hopeless case, aggravated by senseless physicians, cheated year after year in the hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady whose cure will take years or perhaps be impossible. Born with an ardent and lively temperament, even susceptible to the diversions of society, I was compelled early to isolate myself, to live in loneliness, for I am deaf. How could I possibly admit such an infirmity in the one sense which should have been more perfect in me than in others? What a humiliation when someone who stood beside me and heard a flute in the distance when I heard nothing, or someone heard the shepherd singing and again I heard nothing. Such incidents brought me to the verge of despair, but little more, and I would have put an end to my life. Only art it was that withheld me. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had created all that I felt called upon to create, and so I endured this wretched existence, truly wretched. Patience, it is said, that I must now choose for my guide. I have done so." So that's Beethoven talking about his hearing loss. So anyway, getting back to my story, a day came when I was playing a Bach cantata at Emmanuel Church, and we were playing a section of the cantata which is called a recitative. And a recitative is the narrative part of the piece where the vocal line is more closer to speaking, and the accompaniment is holding long notes. And generally the conductor stops conducting at that point, and we just listen to the singer and we follow her. When she or he changes their note, we change with them. And I realized I could not hear her. So every single note I played, I was guessing where to put that. I had to look at the other musicians and see when they changed their bows, but sometimes there were two of us playing viola. And by the way, that's my main instrument, viola. I don't think I mentioned that before. So there were just two of us, and sometimes the violas had to change on their own. And it was torture. And it was at that point that I said to myself, I have to stop. This is no fun. This is not enjoyable. It's driving me crazy. It's like torture. And I stopped cold turkey. I walked out of church that day and said, no more. And actually the last 3 performances I played before I stopped playing completely were all Bach. And I love Bach, so that was very appropriate. I turned my back on playing completely for 3 years. And people would say to me, well, didn't you want to play for your own enjoyment? And I said, no, because I don't enjoy it. I can't play up to the standards I'm used to. It doesn't bring me any pleasure at all. And I decided to take kind of a Buddhist approach to my hearing loss. I was just thinking about this the other day. When I was 17 years old, and I went to Manhattan School of Music for 1 year to study with the eminent violist Lillian Fuchs, I got a copy of Zen and the Art of Archery. And that really had a big influence on me. I was fascinated by that and how it applied to playing an instrument and playing music. So anyway, I decided to think of my hearing loss as a neutral event, neither good nor bad, but just something that happened and to deal with it. So for 3 years, I didn't touch my instrument, as I said, and then something very dramatic happened. And part of the story is, as I said before, describing the twists and turns that brought me back into playing. So this very dramatic thing that happened is that a dear family member, actually he and his wife had paid for some very upscale, high quality hearing aids for me. They were close to $6,000 in the hopes that I would be able to continue performing as a musician, but that was not possible. They had been very generous to me. And Jean, this couple's names are Dolly and Jean. Jean had a very bad fall and broke his neck and almost died. He had to have 3 operations to repair his broken neck and his esophagus and various things that were injured. And he had a long rehab at home. So I wanted to do something special for Jean. So I went down to Washington, D.C., where they live, to give them moral support and help out as I could. And Jean loved music. He was a pianist, amateur pianist. They had a piano in their living room. He played very sensitively by ear. So I thought, maybe I can play for Jean. And I recruited a pianist, a good friend who lived in Washington, to come and play with me. Now the trick was that I hadn't touched my viola for 3 years, so I had to take it out of the case and start playing it. And it felt terrible at first. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's a nice idea, but my fingers felt like sausages. I felt like they couldn't do anything right. But I persisted, and after about 15 or 20 minutes, the muscle memory started kicking in, and I thought, yeah, actually, I can kind of do this. I think I can do this. And so we were able to put together a program for Dolly and Jean, and they really enjoyed it. So I thought, this is really nice to be able to be playing again, and playing in a meaningful way, and playing as a gift for these dear family members. I would like to play for you one of the pieces that I played for Dolly and Jean. And this is a Bach Arioso. It's from a Bach cantata, but it's actually an instrumental section with no singing. And it was originally written for oboe and strings, but it works really nicely on the viola. So the next step was that a friend of mine told me that her sister, who worked at a special needs adult daycare center, told her that sometimes she had people come in and play music for the adults in the daycare center. And I said, well, I could do that. And she said, really? And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So I went there in Back Bay, Boston, and put together a program that I thought would appeal to them. So it was a combination. I did some Bach, but I also did some fiddle tunes and show tunes, traditional songs. And they really responded. They were so appreciative. And so it was another step towards realizing that there were some situations where I could actually play and people would enjoy it. And it reminded me of when I was playing with Apple Hill. One of my favorite things to do was to play for special audiences. And when I say special audiences, these were really special audiences. And the first, one of the first memories of playing for a special audience was right here at Apple Hill, just across the way in the concert barn. And the flutist in the group, there were wind players in the group at that time. Now it's a string quartet, the Apple Hill String Quartet, but then it was a mixed ensemble. And the flutist had a student who was teaching special ed. And she asked if she could bring her special ed class to come hear a rehearsal. And we said, sure, yeah, that would be great. So she brought her class over, and they were, as I recall, pretty young, grade school age, probably around six or seven. And so there was one little girl who was deaf, and the teacher led the little girl over to me and had her put her hand on my viola while I played it so she could hear the vibrations. And then we played a very rollicking piece by the Czechoslovakian composer Dvorak, who was very influenced by folk music. We played a piece, piano quartet for violin, viola, cello, and piano that was very dance-like and very rousing. And the kids really responded to that. And one little boy, at the end, after we finished playing, he jumped up on his chair. He was so excited, and he said, "Thank you." And we thought, oh, he really liked it. That's so touching. That's so nice. And as the kids were leaving, the teacher came over to us, and she bent over, and she said very quietly, "That is the first time I've heard that boy speak." And I thought, oh my gosh, the power of music is amazing. So another time when we played for special audience was when we were on tour in California. This was the Apple Hill group. And we were asked to come play at the Stanford Children's Hospital. And they had a small performance space where we gave a children's program. We also went to some of the rooms and played for the children individually who couldn't come into the performance space. But during this program that we did, I looked out into the audience and I saw a young mother sitting with a baby in her lap, maybe under a year old, I would say. And she had a pump in her hand, and she was squeezing this pump the whole time we were playing. And it dawned on me that she was breathing for the baby. And after we finished playing, she came up to us and she said, "I want to thank you. While you were playing, I could feel my baby relax in my arms in a way that I've never felt before." And once again, the power of music. So I really loved playing for special situations like this. It was so meaningful. And so I'm going to play one of the things that I played for the adult daycare center. And I'm switching over to violin because I play both instruments. I started on violin in 4th grade in class lessons that were offered through the public school, which was pretty amazing because I probably would never have picked up an instrument if it hadn't been offered through the public school. And I took to it, I loved it. And when I was in high school, I switched over to viola. Violin or viola are very similar. I'm just going to speak a minute or two about the difference. You may already know this, but you can see how similar they are in size. And the viola is just a little bit lower. The lowest note is a C string, which the violin doesn't have, but the violin has an E string. See if I can do this, which the viola doesn't have. And the viola has a deeper, richer sound than the violin. I would say the violin has a especially sweet sound. And other than that, a lot of people play both instruments because they're so similarly played. But I talk about, when people ask about the difference between playing a violin and viola, I say playing viola is a little harder because it's bigger and you have to hold it up. You have more weight to hold, and I jokingly say that it's the difference between a Maserati and a Mack truck, if you're comparing it to driving. That's an exaggeration, obviously, but anyway. So this fiddle tune is called Fiddlesticks, and it uses a technique called the shuffle, and I'm just going to show you what the shuffle is. It probably sounds familiar. That's the shuffle, and this is Fiddlesticks. And now I will play for you one of the pieces that I played for them on viola. And this is a movement from a Bach suite. Now, Bach, as I mentioned, is a favorite composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. And he wrote a lot of sacred music, but he also wrote a lot of secular music. And I think this is so interesting. Bach used a lot of numerology in his compositions. And when he wrote a group of secular pieces, he would write them in a group of 6 for the 6 secular days of the week. So Monday through Saturday, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and leave out Sunday, the sacred day. So there's 6 Bach Brandenburgs, there's 6 Bach solo cello suites, there's 6 solo violin partitas and sonatas, etc. And these pieces have been made very well known by Yo-Yo Ma, who sold out Hollywood Bowl playing the 6 Bach cello suites, which is pretty incredible. And as I said, I had a wonderful opportunity to play with him. He is such a gentleman, such a good person. And he's a real ambassador for music and peace and doing meaningful things for I would say connecting with people. And it's not an ego thing for him. I think it means more than that. I know it does. So this is these Bach cello suites were based on French dance music. They weren't written to be danced to, but they were based on the dance music. The French were very, very much into dance. And each suite starts with a prelude, and then there's a suite of dances. And this one is a bourrée. And I might also mention that even though these were written for cello, they work very well on viola. Viola is an octave higher than the cello, but the names of the notes are all the same. So it transcribes very easily to viola. So my story continues. The next thing that happened was that one of my sisters-in-law invited me to go to a ceilidh at her church. And I had never heard of a ceilidh before. It was a fundraiser, a benefit fundraiser for the church. And she bought me a ticket as a birthday present. And what I learned is that a ceilidh is an evening of music and socializing and good times. And the music is British Isles music. And there was a couple who had what's called a fiddle and box group, the two of them. So that's violin and accordion. And they played a wonderful concert, all from memory, of ceilidh music. And then there was a dinner with British Isles type food and then a rollicking dance. It was a wonderful evening. And they invited people to come early to the ceilidh if they would like to learn one of the dances that they were going to be doing, bring our instruments, learn the dance, and then participate with them when it came time for the dance. So I thought, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'll bring my violin and see how it is. And we were taught, there were a few of us, a handful of us who played various instruments. We were taught to play this tune. I didn't quite hear the name of it. I got Coconut, but I didn't hear the rest of it. And I found out later by looking it up online that it's called Coconut Dance. So one of the things I learned when I played this is that there's this little ornament where it goes, that little ornament, and it's called a twiddle. I thought that was pretty cute, so I just thought I'd mention that. Now, let's see, the next step was a very big and very important step for me, is that I discovered that in Boston, where I lived, that there was a hearing loss community. And I had joined this organization several years before, HLAA, which stands for Hearing Loss Association of America, which is a national group, but I didn't realize there were local chapters. And I just went online to see what I could find out, and I discovered there was this chapter of this organization that had all kinds of programs and meetings, and wow, I must say my life really changed at that point. And that's when I started becoming educated about hearing loss, because I just have to say here that I think most audiologists are very good at what they do, which is fitting people for hearing aids and selling hearing aids. However, what I really missed was being educated about hearing loss. And actually, when I first went to have my hearing tested and to get hearing aids, I asked them, even though I had decided to treat my hearing loss as a neutral event, I think I also perceived that this was going to be a difficult transition in some ways. And I said, can you refer me to a social worker who specializes in helping people cope with hearing loss? And they looked at me like I had asked if the moon was made out of blue cheese. And they said, no. So I was on my own, really. So finding this community was huge, because one of the things about hearing loss that's difficult is that it's isolating. There are so many social situations that become really challenging and really difficult, even with hearing aids. For example, in a restaurant where there's a lot of multiple conversations, lots of sound happening in the background. A lot of contemporary restaurants have this minimalist style where there's a lot of reflective surfaces. So it's very noisy. Parties, gatherings where there's multiple conversations, very difficult to pick out a conversation when you're talking one-on-one with someone. And I think it's confusing for people who don't have hearing loss, because sometimes we who have hearing loss can seem to be hearing perfectly normally, and that's under ideal circumstances. So if it's just 2 or 3 people talking, there's no background noise, if I can see your mouth and your face, if your head's not turned away, if another thing is, which makes me very sad, is if someone has an accent, that makes it much harder for me to understand. And so there are all kinds of situations where we can become isolated. I love seeing, when there are family reunions, I love getting together with my family, but it's very hard for me to participate because there's a lot of conversations happening at the same time. And so often at parties, what I'll do is I'll go into the kitchen and sit in the kitchen by myself, and then people will come and talk to me one-on-one. So one of the things when you have hearing loss is that you learn coping strategies. So meeting all these people with hearing loss who had a lot of the same experiences I did was a big important step. And through the community, I met an auditory trainer, and I didn't know there was such a thing as an auditory trainer. I went to a program where he spoke. His name is Jeff Plant, and he has an organization called the Hearing Rehabilitation Foundation. And he talked about what hearing rehabilitation can do for people with hearing loss. Now, what the hearing aids do is that they correct the mechanical, or they help, they don't completely correct, but they help with the mechanical problem. But really what does the hearing is your brain. So your brain can be trained to make better use of what input is coming in. So at Jeff's talk, near the end of his talk, he talked a lot about music, actually, which I definitely perked up my ears at that. And he said that the reason it's so hard for people with hearing loss to listen to classical music is because classical music is the most complex music. And he recommends for people with hearing loss to listen to less complex music, simpler music, not in the sense of being unsophisticated, but with maybe 1 or 2 players. And I had found that in my own experience that what I enjoyed listening to was like solo jazz guitar, or guitar, solo guitar in general. Guitar, the notes don't sustain, so they dissipate very quickly, and that makes it easier to listen to because you don't have notes on top of each other. So one of the hardest instruments for me to listen to is piano, because there's so many notes, and so that was very interesting to me. And I started working with Jeff, and he would have me watch some videos and listen to some videos of different kinds of music that he thought I might enjoy and be able to listen to with enjoyment. And he introduced me to this tune, which I really liked, called Who Can Sail Without Wind? And it comes from the Faroe Islands, an archipelago in Sweden. And I didn't realize this before, but sailing and boating is very big in Sweden, which makes sense because of all the coastline and all the islands. I would say maybe sort of in some ways comparable to coastal Maine. So I'm going to tell you the words of the song. It's a folk song, and the words are, who can sail without wind? Who can row without oars? Who can part with a dear old friend without shedding tears? I can sail without wind. I can row without oars. But I can't part from a dear old friend without shedding tears. Now, this song, I think, relates to the next song I'm going to be playing. Not that long ago, a few months ago, I was walking around in my apartment, and I started hearing a song in my head that I didn't know where it came from. And I thought it was very haunting, kind of like this song that's haunting. And so I didn't want to forget it, so I recorded myself singing it so I'd remember it. Then I thought, I must have heard this a long time ago, and just came back into my mind. So I asked all these people, do you recognize this song? Nobody recognized the song. And I finally thought, I think I wrote that song without realizing that it originated with me. And it's a song without words, and I call it My Song. So the next thing that happened was that soon after I started working with Jeff, he asked me to participate in a seminar he was putting together about music and hearing loss. And he asked me if I would tell my story and do a little playing, and I said I'd be delighted to, and I was very excited about doing this. And this is how my program got started, how this presentation started. And one of the things that I played is a song that I think you'll recognize, and something that surprised me a great deal happened when I played this song, and I'll tell you what it was after I play it. So that, of course, was Danny Boy, also known as Londonderry Air. So when I played that, a woman in the second row, right after I finished playing it, raised her hand, and I asked her to speak, and she said, "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just have to tell you that this is the first time since I started losing my hearing that I've been able to listen to music and enjoy it." And tears were streaming down her face. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is, again, connects with the power of music and the fact that I could do something that would help someone with hearing loss to enjoy music. I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And it gave me such a good feeling to know that I could communicate, play music for people, and especially people with hearing loss, and have them enjoy it. And I think that song really kind of does it for a lot of people. It's a beautiful song. So I'm getting very close to the end of my story. And one of I would say the most emotionally significant turning point happened when I was reading some publicity for a program that was going to be presented by the HLAA Boston chapter, and there's another group called Association of Late Deafened Adults, ALDA, A-L-D-A, and I belong to both of those groups, and they're both wonderful. So they were presenting a one-woman show called My Life with a Cranky Cochlea, done by a woman from Canada named Gail Hannon. And it was an excellent program. It was poignant, it was funny, it was educational, all of those things. And when I read the publicity, she writes, "So you have hearing loss. So get over it. But first you have to grieve." That hit me. That hit me so deeply. And I thought, this is what I have not done. I have not grieved for my hearing loss. I decided to treat it as a neutral event. And yet, I lost what I love to do. I lost this is where I get choked up. I lost my vocation. I lost my livelihood. I lost my tribe. So much of my social life was with my friends, my musician friends. So much of it was connected to the rehearsals and concerts we did, going out afterwards, going out beforehand. I lost all of that. And I lost my identity as a musician. So those 3 years when I wasn't playing music at all, I was basically lost. But I was in denial about it. And as a friend of a friend said to me when I was telling her my story, she lost her vision because of diabetes. And she said, sometimes denial gets you through something that would otherwise be unbearable. And I think she was right about that. So I started to grieve for my loss, for my hearing loss. And the thing about grief is that you can't take a detour around it. You have to go through it. You have to live it. You have to experience it. But there's sweetness on the other side. And it wasn't until I learned to grieve that I discovered the hidden gifts of hearing loss. And there are many of them. Well, for one thing, I wouldn't say I became humble, but I learned humility. And I also became much less of a perfectionist. I knew that I couldn't play perfectly. When I had performed professionally, I was always striving for perfection. I always wanted it to be perfect, and it was never perfect. It could never be perfect. and I was always dissatisfied. Now, there's an aspect of that I think is good, that of striving to do your best. But there's also an aspect of that is limiting in a way, because once I gave up perfection, I know I don't play in tune, I used to play better in tune before I started losing my hearing, I know that. But once I gave up perfection, I had felt so much more ease when I was playing. It was amazing to me that there was a constraint that was there that vanished. And I also felt that it felt like the music was pure. There was less ego. There was less, oh, look at me. Look at what I can do. It was more, here's some music. Let's just want to share it with you. So I think the learning some humility comes with giving up perfection. And I wouldn't have realized the depths of the kindness and generosity of my friends, family, and helpers in my life if it hadn't been for my hearing loss. I also got to do something that was on my wish list that I didn't think that would ever happen. And that was, I'll backtrack a little bit. I love NPR. I love to listen to NPR. Thank goodness for NPR. And I always thought, when I listened to interviews and stories on NPR, I'd think, oh, wouldn't it be fun to be doing one of those? Well, I got an email one day from Peter O'Dowd, and he said, I'd like to do a story with you, telling about your experience. And that was such a big thrill to be part of that. And if you're interested, you can hear it. It's a podcast in their archives at the website. You can stream it. And I was very honored because at the end of the year, this was a couple of years ago, at the end of the year, they chose their 10 favorite stories from the year, and that was one of them. So, of course, that made me happy. So, one of the hidden gifts is that I met some wonderful people, some of them who are very good friends now that I would not have met before. I've also found this program, this presentation, that I love giving. I've done it in senior centers, retirement communities, libraries, churches, all kinds of venues, and I love doing it. So that's also a hidden gift of the hearing loss. Now, if someone had said to me when I first had to stop playing, or I did stop playing and had experienced this hearing loss, debilitating hearing loss, if they had said, well, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, I think I would have been pretty irritated with them. And I'm glad nobody did say that to me, but that's basically what happened. So I'm going to end with a song that says better in music than I can say in words how grateful I am. Thank you very much. Be well. Bless you.
you.